Hey guys, so I have our book here, Lost on a Mountain in Maine, and I'm going to read aloud Chapter 9, I Hear an Airplane, the Sixth Day. Now remember in the previous chapter, he found a cabin, and inside that cabin he found an old musty blanket that a mouse was even trying to keep a hold of. But he managed to take it and has moved on, found a place to sleep, and now is just waking up. A gentle breeze was blowing across that hill, and it kept the flies and mosquitoes away from me. For once I was free of them. I'll never forget how warm and comfy that blanket felt. The cuts and bites on my legs seemed to stop hurting. My feet felt warm and safe, and even my toes softened a little as I fell asleep. That was early morning. So after he took the blanket from the cabin, he fell asleep in broad daylight in the probably, before even dawn. When I woke up, the sun was way down on the other side. I had slept all day, and boy, did I feel good. I sat up and wondered what to do next. Then I noticed something was the matter with the backs of my legs. They smarted and pained as though I had sat down on hot coals. I got up and examined them. Now, before I go any further, I want you to turn and talk to the person next to you. Knowing what you know now, that he fell asleep in the wee hours of the morning, and then he woke up when the day was almost over, what do you think might have happened to his legs? Go ahead and turn and talk for a moment. Okay, now come back to me. So, remember, he lost his pants, he's lost his shoes, so the only thing that was keeping him covered was his shirt on his back. So let's keep reading and see if your predictions were correct. My legs smarted and pained as though I had sat down on hot coals. I got up and examined them. The skin was as red as paint and all hot and fiery looking. Lying there in the sun for so many hours had given me the worst sunburn, that I had ever had. After that, for a long time, I found it more comfortable to keep going than to sit down to rest. I put on my reefer and threw the blanket over my arm. It was awfully heavy, but I had to have it. I remember I carried it a long way. Just as the sun was sinking, I came around a bend in the tote road and saw something that made my heart jump with joy. There, right in front of me, was a telephone wire nailed to trees. I shouted and danced and laughed, and then I cried some. I was saved at last. All I had to do was follow it. It would lead me straight to some camp. I looked at the wire. It didn't seem too old. Since it led into the tote road at that point, I decided to just keep going as I was. Boy, the sight of that wire running along ahead of me gave me a lot of courage and cheered me up a good deal. Now here, where we live, we have telephone wires in some areas. Most new neighborhoods bury their telephone wires underground so we don't see them. But the next time you drive around, take a look near the roads and near neighborhoods. Those wires that are held up by poles, that's a telephone wire. That night I crawled under a down tree and curled up in my blanket. I didn't feel so bad, but I was hungry. My head felt hot and I had queer dreams. I dreamed I was in a New York automat with lots of nickels in my hand. Now, an automat in the 1940s would have been kind of like a fast food restaurant, but instead of having a grill and a chef and things like that, they had vending machines. So you could go to one vending machine and put in your nickels and select a sandwich. Then you could go to another vending machine, put in your nickels, and select a piece of pie. I put in a nickel, and down would drop the door on a ham sandwich. Then a hand would reach in over my shoulder and take the sandwich. I moved on to a big piece of lemon meringue pie and drop in a nickel. Down would drop the door, and before I could reach in, a hand would go across my shoulder and take that pie. Pretty soon I had used up all my nickels, and hadn't a thing to eat. That was pretty tough, and I wanted to get mad, but I couldn't. I just went out for some more nickels. I woke up after that dream and stayed awake a long time. The wind was making noises in the trees, like a storm coming. I didn't like the sound of that wind. It wasn't friendly, like the cheeping of a chipmunk. Pretty soon I knew the dawn was coming. Creatures began to move in the forest, and I couldn't see them, but they were all about me. I closed my eyes and wished the night would stay forever. I never was glad to have the day come. Remember, he mentioned in some of his previous footnotes that he was never glad day came because that meant pain. Every time he walked, he had pain. He was sore, cuts and scrapes, that sunburn. Suddenly I heard a chipmunk cheeping over my head. I opened my eyes, and there he was, the same chipmunk I had seen the morning before. I knew he was the same one from the way he jerked his tail and bent down and looked at me. As soon as the road was light enough to travel over, I got up and folded my blanket and started on. First, though, I said my prayers. I prayed hard, too, and I felt that God wanted me to get out, but he wanted me to do it on my own legs. I prayed and cried and hollered for food, but nothing happened, so I figured food wasn't so important after all. I'd find some more strawberries and they would be enough. After a while, the tote road went up on a higher level, and I did find berries in a little open space. A few, and I spent a long time picking and eating them. After I had eaten all I could find, I went on for a long way. There were high trees overhead most of the time. I was down on my stomach getting a drink from the stream when I heard a low hum. I listened. It sounded to me like an airplane. But Christmas! No airplane would fly over that timber. What for? The humming grew into a roar. I tried to find an open spot. Maybe if I could see the plane, the pilot could see me. I ran and ran. I stumbled on the logs laid across the road and fell. Then I went lame, and I could only hop along on one foot. Pretty soon I knew I couldn't find any place where I could see that plane. So I stopped hopping and listened. That plane just zoomed right over my head and died away across the trees. I knew then that Dad was looking for me. Things must be pretty bad when they had to get planes. I sat down beside a tree and cried. Now he talked about the trees, the tree logs being in the road, and here is an illustration kind of what that looked like. How sad to know that you can hear a possible rescue, but you can't get to it. I must be lost for sure. When even a plane couldn't find me, maybe it was no use to go on. Maybe there wasn't any camp for miles and miles. Maybe that telephone wire didn't go any place after all. Maybe I was following it the wrong way to another abandoned camp. After I'd cried a while, I knelt down and prayed. I wanted the plane to come back. I wanted to hear the noise of its motors, but it didn't come back. I got up and went on, still a little lame. Now and then I could see the sky. Clouds were piling up, and I felt it was going to storm. Remember, being lame means you have trouble walking or can't walk at all. I picked up the blanket. It was awfully heavy. It made me stagger. One end slipped down, and I stepped on it, and it tripped me up. I fell and hurt myself. I left the blanket where it dropped and went on. I had to find camp that day. I had to find it. I had to find it. I knew I had to find it because my legs were stiffening up. I walked on like a man on two wooden legs, just one leg out and then the other. One leg, then the other. There's a footnote here that says, the agony of Dawn's every moment at this point is clearly understood when it is realized that his feet by now were a mass of cuts, each one inflamed and some infected. His knees were badly swollen, and thorns in the instep of each foot were later removed at the hospital in Bangor. So they're giving you a little bit of what's going to happen at the end of the story. They're going to be finding thorns when they do finally find him. But you can imagine how painful it must be for him to walk around. Something was happening in my head, something terrible, and I was falling from somewhere into a black pit between jagged rocks with millions and millions of blue streaks going past me like shooting stars. I was trying to call someone, but I couldn't make a sound. I was just falling, falling. The next thing I knew, I woke up, and it was getting dark. I was sitting on a rock looking at my feet. They didn't seem to belong to me at first. They were the feet of someone else. The toenails were all broken and bleeding, and there were thorns in the middle of the soles. I cried a little as I tried to get out those thorns. They were deep, and they were broken off. I wondered why they didn't hurt more. But when I felt my toes, I knew those toes were hard and stiff and had scarcely any feeling in them. The part next to the big toe was like leather. I tried to pinch it, but I couldn't feel anything. My head ached. I didn't want to move. But night was falling, and I had to go on, at least as far as some big tree. I got to my feet. It was that hard. I could scarcely bend my knees, and my head was so dizzy I staggered. I had to go across an open space to the stream, and as I went along, I saw a big bear just ahead of me. Christmas, he was big, big as a house, I thought. But I wasn't a bit scared, not a single bit. Actually, I was glad to see him. When he got near, he knew, or I knew, he didn't see me, so I crouched down a little behind some bushes, but I kept my head up so that I could watch him. I didn't want him to run right into me. He ate berries as he went along. He'd swing his head and nip one way, and then he'd swing his head and nip another. He kept making grunting noises. I don't see how he ever came so close to me without seeing me, but I kept mightily still. I hardly breathed. I knew I was a goner if he took after me. I could run or climb a tree. Oh, I couldn't run or climb a tree, not with those feet and legs. Pretty soon he dropped down on his front feet and I couldn't see him anymore, but I could hear him breaking down the bushes as he went away. And that's the end of chapter 9. As I was reading, I recalled a footnote that I read not too long ago. Here it is. It's back whenever they found the cabin. It says here that when they recreated Don's story and he went back later to kind of see where the trail was that he followed, it says here that they estimated that Don covered, let's see, I missed it, that Don covered over 48 miles in his whole journey. And after they looked at that, they figured with the way he went back and forth and circled around in some areas, that he may have even covered 3 times that. So if you think of 50 times 3, that would be 150 miles. That's how long Don had walked from the beginning of getting lost until the time that they're going to find him by the end. It's amazing. I hope you enjoyed chapter 9, and on Friday we'll continue on. Have a great day.